Hi biologists! Let's start by looking at the learning objectives for this lesson. At the end of this lesson and following the biology syllabus, you should be able to define and identify the characteristics of life: nutrition, organization, sensitivity or response, excretion and reproduction. What does this actually mean? What are we trying to learn? It's not that difficult. We have to give the definition of and recognize the characteristics of life. These are nutrition, organization, sensitivity or response, excretion and reproduction. Let's go. Normally, I don't start this section until we have the course covered, so that we can tie it all together by remembering stuff and concepts that we've already learned. However, if you approach this at the start, and in fairness, it is at the beginning of the biology syllabus, you'll be fine. It's just that you might have a lot more new terms and concepts to deal with. Let's have a closer look at these characteristics of life. These characteristics allow organisms to carry out reactions that are needed to survive and reproduce. One of our objectives is to define the characteristics of life. So the characteristics of life are defined as the common characteristic ways, characteristic features that all the organisms have in common. So they're defined as the common characteristic ways of fulfilling the organism's functional need, allow the organisms to carry out metabolism, chemical reactions, and to survive. So basically, in a nutshell, the characteristics of life allow organisms to carry out the reactions needed to survive and reproduce. They are nutrition, organization, sensitivity or response, excretion, and reproduction. We're going to take each one of these characteristics in turn and delve into them a little deeper. This will range over a broad area of the course and will help pull together everything we've learned already. For starters, the definition of nutrition is the way organisms get and use their food. A basic concept behind this that we have met several times before and should master is the idea that the sun is the basic source of energy for all nutrition. Plants use sunlight directly when they carry out photosynthesis and make food. The energy in the plants is then passed on to the animals when they eat the plants. So in this way, the energy is said to flow from the sun to the plants and then to the animals. We have met this concept several places before, in particular with food chains. Let's go back and have a quick look at the other areas where we have met the idea of nutrition before. In the unit on food, we met the idea that nutrition was needed to supply the raw materials needed for a normal life. The raw materials are needed for bodybuilding, meaning making muscles and cell parts, and for growth and repair. We met the idea that nutrition was needed for energy. This energy was for carrying out the chemical reactions, for metabolism, and for the continuity of life. Again, we can see an overlap in the section on ecology, where we met the idea that energy flows in the ecosystem. Do you recall we said that every ecosystem needs a constant input of energy to function properly? This input of energy comes from the sun. We will not run out of it, at least in our lifetimes anyway. And remember, we said that matter was recycled, but that we needed a constant input of energy from the sun. So the sun is the primary source of energy for our planet. Everything depends on the sun. And feeding allows energy to flow from one organism to another, and we saw that when we studied food chains. We also met the idea of nutrition in the section in photosynthesis and in the section on bacteria. Do you recall that there were two types of nutrition? The first type of nutrition was autotrophic nutrition. You make your own autograph. Autotrophic nutrition is where organisms make their own food. These would usually be green plants. The other type of nutrition was heterotrophic nutrition, where organisms cannot make their own food. So in a nutshell, plants get their food by photosynthesis, and they can also absorb chemicals from the environment. We had that notion in the chapter in food, where plants had to absorb the elements, usually in the form of a salt, from the soil. Animals get their food by feeding on other organisms. This brings us to the second characteristic, organization, or the big O word. Life means that living things must be highly organized. The organizational feature of life is that living things are made of cells. So the definition of organization is that it is the way that living things are arranged into cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, individuals, and populations to fulfill their functional need, to allow them to carry out metabolism or chemical reactions and continuity, allowing them to survive and reproduce. Some organisms like bacteria and the amoeba are single-celled or unicellular, whereas most organisms are multicellular. Cells contain all the chemicals that are needed for life. Cells are organized into tissues, and in turn tissues are organized into organs, and a series of organs will form an organ system, and a group of systems will form an individual. A collection of individuals of the same species, remember we had that in ecology, will form a population. Now, what we have to keep in mind here is that structures relate to functions. And if any of the structures in the body are damaged, then there will be a loss of function. This is rather easy to understand. When you break your arm, break your bone structure, then your arm can no longer function. If you disrupt the structure, function ceases or stops. You might recall meeting this idea already in the section on cell diversity. Remember the definition of a tissue. S and S. Put a ring on it because I like it. A tissue is a group of similar cells carrying out a special function. Hear all the S sounds. Similar cells carrying out a special function. S's. We had examples of animal tissues, which were connective tissue like bone and blood and cartilage, and nervous tissue. We had examples of plant tissues, dermal tissue, ground tissue, and vascular tissue. You might remember these from drawing cross-sections of plant organs. Remember the definition of an organ. An organ is a number of different tissues working together. A team of tissues. A team of tissues working together forms an organ, working together to carry out one or more functions. We had examples of animal organs, heart and liver and kidney. We had examples of plant organs, stem, root, leaves and flowers. An organ system, or a system, is a number of different organs working together to carry out one or more functions. Notice, to make life a little easier, the similarity between the two definitions. Just be careful. The organ is the team of tissues. Team of tissues make an organ. whereas a system is a number of organs working together. Animal organ systems are things like the nervous system, the circulatory system, and the digestive system. Remember this material from cell diversity. Our third characteristic is the characteristic of sensitivity, also known as response or behaviour. The definition is that sensitivity is the ability of organisms to detect and react to changes in their internal and external environment. Living things have to respond in order to react to changes in their environments. Animals have fast responses, whereas plants tend to respond slower, and the responses are less obvious than those of animals. Animals respond using organised structures, like we have sense organs whereby we can respond to light and sound and touch. Animals respond quickly, as we've said. Plants respond by growing and moving and growing towards the sun, perhaps. We would have had this idea in the unit on tropisms, where the plants can grow in response to light, temperature, and the availability of water. Plants respond slowly. Where have we met this before? Well, do you remember we studied the structures of response? We learned that there are 5 structures of response that are used by animals to respond to stimuli in the internal or external environment. The first structure of response was the nervous system. So basically, if we saw that mad bull in the field with us, well, we would see, hear it, smell it. We would pick those stimuli up with our sense organs. A message would go into our brain. We would make a decision in our brain as to what we were going to do about this circumstance. When the decision would be made, the message would be sent out by the nerves to your muscles, whereby we would run or stand and bullfight. We would get a little hyped up, so the adrenaline would be pumping. So such a reaction to the environment would involve our hormonal system or our internal response, because in response to the heightened adrenaline levels, our heartbeat will start to beat faster. As we get a bit too close to this bull, then perhaps we might inhale some pathogens which we will have to defend ourselves against. Hence, we use our immune system. We met the idea of growth in plants and sensitivity towards light. Plants will grow in response to 2 factors: external factors out in the environment like light intensity, daylight, gravity, and temperature. Plants will also grow in response to internal factors. They will grow in response to growth regulators. This idea is important. It overlaps the section in ecology, where we have to show responses to the environment by plants and measure it in our practical work, and it also overlaps in the section where we did growth regulators and learnt about IAA. This brings us to excretion. The definition of excretion is that it is getting rid of wastes made as a result of chemical reactions in the body. Excretion helps living things to maintain a fairly constant balance between their internal and external environment. For example, if we are building up too high a level of water in our blood or in our tissues, we're going to have to get rid of it, along with the idea of getting rid of excess carbon dioxide and excess salts. Many of these things are poisons, like urea, that would damage us if they were allowed to accumulate. So therefore it's important to get rid of these toxic materials, and we get rid of them using excretion. Plants don't need excretion as much as animals. They make their own food, so they will not produce or take in as much waste, and they will get rid of their wastes through the openings called stomatas. All in all, plants and animals have organised structures which allow them to get rid of the wastes. The leaves are going to act as excretory organs for the plants. However, excretion is normally associated with animals, and the term loss of waste gases is used with plants. In a nutshell, what kind of organised structures do animals have for getting rid of wastes? Well, animals have lungs, skin, and their urinary system or their kidney system for getting rid of wastes. These wastes, as we said before, are not to be confused with number 2s. These wastes are made as a result of chemical reactions. The organised structures in plants are the stomatas in the leaves, which are little openings, O, they're like little mouths, M, under the surface of the leaves that let gases in and out. Here, our focus is on excretion, so we're concentrating on letting the gases out. Lenticels are structures in stems that let the waste gases out as well. You might recall the excretory organs. Our excretory organ was the lungs, and the excretory products, the waste materials, are carbon dioxide and water vapour. Another excretory organ was the skin, and the excretory products, or the wastes that the skin will eliminate, is water and salts, also known as sweat. The advice would be to always use the words water, salts, and put sweat in brackets. The kidney is another excretory organ, getting rid of the products water, salts, urea, and urine in brackets. Remember, you breathe out the wastes, you sweat out the wastes, or you wee out the wastes. This brings us to the last characteristic of reproduction. So reproduction is the production of new individuals. It is a rather chicken and egg situation because all life can only develop from living things. So this means that organisms have to be able to produce offspring of their own type. Life comes from life. In order to continue, the organisms must be able to reproduce. Now, there are two types of reproduction, asexual and sexual. Asexual reproduction involves a simple division into two. This is carried out by bacteria and amoeba. Bacteria and amoeba are only one cell big. There is no such thing as boy and girl bacteria and amoebas. So when they want to reproduce, they simply split in half. This is called binary fission in bacteria. Binary means two, fission means splitting. It is called budding in yeast because sometimes the two new cells stick together like buddies. It is called mitosis in the amoeba. In sexual reproduction, which we would have done in the plant and in the animal kingdom, this will involve two parents, two different genders, male and female sex cells, male and female gametes, eggs and sperms, and as we have just said, carried out by plants and animals. Having gone through our list and delved in a little deeper and revised a lot of the course, we must understand that one characteristic alone is not enough to qualify something as being alive. We have to show 5 characteristics of life. Noser: nutrition, organisation, sensitivity, excretion, and reproduction. These characteristics interact with one another and work towards metabolism and continuity. Remember, metabolism requires an interaction of nutrition, organisation, excretion, and sensitivity. Continuity requires an interaction of nutrition, organisation, reproduction, and sensitivity. Do you remember we put this all together in the earlier video? Nutrition, Organisation, sensitivity, excretion, and reproduction were the characteristics of life. Nutrition, organisation, sensitivity, and excretion interacted together to carry out metabolism. Nutrition, organisation, sensitivity, and reproduction interacted to carry out continuity. When metabolism and continuity are put together, that will then give rise to life. So in a nutshell, what is the definition of life? And to repeat ourselves, to define the definition of life, it is life consists of having all of a series of 5 characteristics: nutrition, organisation, sensitivity, excretion, and reproduction, interacting towards metabolism and continuity. So basically, life involves an interaction of processes towards metabolism and continuity. But there is no completely satisfactory and universally acceptable definition of life, as the scientists find it difficult to come to an agreement. Now that we have arrived at the end of our lesson, have we achieved our objective? Can you define and identify the characteristics of life: nutrition, organisation, sensitivity or response, excretion, and reproduction?